Whenever I hear a car reviewer parrot a marketing statement like, "This car has the most rear seat legroom in its class," I cringe, I cry, and then I die a little bit inside. In this video, we're going to talk about how legroom works, how it is measured, why it is not consistent across brands, how some brands, like Ford, cheat their legroom figures in several of their vehicles in the United States, and what we can do about it, how we can measure legroom in a way that maybe makes more sense. So this is also a request to all of you to comment in the comment section below and tell me which of the methods that we're going to be talking about in this video you would like us to see measuring vehicles ourselves going forward, so we can create a good database of actual legroom numbers. Step 1. How is legroom measured? Well, in the United States, this is largely defined by the J1100 standard by the SAE, although there is no requirement that manufacturers actually follow it, and there's no requirement that manufacturers use the same version of the standard. That is one big problem. Not everybody that is following the standard is following the same version of the standard, but here's how it goes in a nutshell. They basically use a dummy. It's a 5'9" representation of a 50th percentile male, back when that standard was created, mind you. And then they're measuring legroom in a way that may make sense to some engineers. Here's how it goes. They have this dummy in the car with a size 7 shoe, so pretty small shoe there. And that is important because it dictates where the ankle position is. And then they're going to measure with a tape measure like this from that ankle point, the point where your ankle hinges, to the hip point of that dummy, the point where theoretically the hip hinges. And they're going to measure in a straight line. They don't follow the curvature of the seat. That's going to give, I don't know, I'm not 5'9", but that's going to give us something like 33 inches in this car in that seating position. And then they add 10 inches. And the reason they add 10 inches is to accommodate for the curvature of the leg of that 5'9" dummy. Now, most car companies choose to put the seat all the way back and then measure legroom there. Now, according to the advertised numbers for this Kia K4, this should have just over 42 inches of legroom up front. Now, one easy way to get your own legroom measure is to just sort of go from the accelerator pedal position, the bottom of that, and then measure along to the rear seat back. And here we get, I don't know if you can see that, 43 inches right there. So actually pretty close to that SAE measure without involving a crash test dummy or anything like that. The reason I cringe when a lot of reviewers talk solely about rear seat legroom in a vacuum is, guess what the front seat does? It does this. And what does that do? You guessed it, it makes the rear seat smaller. Now, you might be wondering, when car companies are measuring legroom, where do they put the front seat when you're measuring the back seat? And that is a problem, because some companies, like for instance Kia with this vehicle, apparently are leaving the seat all the way back in its tracks, measuring the front seat legroom, and then measuring the rear seat legroom in the same exact position. This is where the size 7 shoe comes into effect as well, because the dummy in the back gets to put its feet under the seat. I don't have size 7s, I have size 12, so keep that in mind. And then they do this same measurement from the theoretical hip point there to that theoretical ankle point, and we get 28.5 inches. Then they add the 10 inches to that, and you get 38.5 inches. That's right about what Kia says this vehicle should get. Is that a realistic measurement? I don't know, but at least it's consistent. The problem is, some companies, most notably Ford in some of their vehicles, Fusion, Escape, a number of other vehicles recently, they don't put the seat in this position. Instead, they put the seat in the position of a 5'9" dummy, that 50th percentile male from the 1960s. And, you know, that would be, I don't know, somewhere way up there. And then there's the front seat angle, which is set at approximately 8 degrees, somewhere around there. I can't even move this seat far enough forward to be in that 5'9" position. And that's where I'm wondering, is a better way to measure rear seat legroom with that front seat all the way back and at an angle that is perhaps consistent with the rear seat fixed angle, and then simply measure the distance from the one to the other, because that's going to give you a better idea of the kind of room that we find back here for child seats or for people with longer limbs. Because I could tuck my knees up in my chest in a lot of vehicles, but if there isn't enough room between my knee and the front seat back, it's not going to matter to me at all because I just couldn't get in there. Or should we be attempting something like a diagonal measure here, a hinged measure, where we are actually measuring from the rear seat back across to the seat cushion and then down there along the floor? That gives us numbers that are relatively similar to most legroom figures advertised for new cars, but it would help us weed out some of those car manufacturers that are trying to game the system a little bit. Every now and then in the comment section, new viewers especially will ask, what's with this combined legroom number? Why do you guys use it? Well, this is exactly why. Vehicles with long seat tracks up front, where you're measuring all the way back, may seem at a disadvantage when it comes to rear seat room. But that's simply because that front seat moves so far rearward. And to get a better picture of exactly how much room you have in here to share amongst the rows, whether we're talking about a 2-row or especially a 3-row vehicle where both the first and second rows move, you need to look at the combined legroom figures to really get an idea of how much space is going on inside. Now, what can you do as a consumer to weed out some of these manufacturers that may be gaming the system? Ford. The easy thing to do is look at passenger volume. If the passenger volume is a lot smaller than a competitor, but it seems like the legroom figures are significantly larger than average for the segment, that's a good indication that a manufacturer is doing what I just mentioned, measuring the front legroom with the front seat all the way back, and then measuring rear legroom with the front seat in that 50th percentile male position from the 1960s, that 5'9" dummy. That's only good if you're a family of 5'9" people and you wanted to put a bigger person in the rear. Then that number's useful. Now's the time to sound off in the comment section and let us know how you would like us to be measuring legroom in the future. And we are going to be measuring some of these numbers with a consistent front seat back angle. And the way that that works in my brain, at least for now, is that I'm going to match the front seat back angle to the rear seat back angle. So that way it's consistent across the interior. And that means that if you're in a vehicle like this, a sedan, where the position's a bit more reclined, I'm going to assume that the front seat should be a bit more reclined. Or if you're in a Wrangler or something like that, where it's very upright, then I'm going to assume that the front seat should also be relatively upright. And that front seat position is definitely going to play a big role if we're interested in measuring rear seat back to the back of the front seat.